That night, I told myself he was just my apprentice. But when he looked at me, I forgot everything I was supposed to remember. The rain was drumming against the windows, and the flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across his face. His breathing was measured, deliberate, as if he feared shattering something precious between us. I could sense his presence beside me, not quite touching, but close enough that every inhale carried his cologne. It wasn't desire I felt. It was something more profound, something achingly gentle. That night, sleep eluded me because as I lay there, I remembered how our story truly began. I teach English literature in Portland, and Ethan was the kind of apprentice mentors never forget. Thoughtful, eloquent, and carrying a wisdom beyond his 24 years. He communicated with his gaze before forming words. And each time he did, something within me quivered like I was discovering a narrative I had no right to hear. One evening, he remained after our workshop session for extra guidance. The corridors were silent, the sky already pregnant with storm clouds. He was grappling with contemporary poetry. Ironic, wasn't it? Because his very presence felt poetic. We began discussing topics beyond the curriculum. Existence, aspirations, solitude. The downpour outside intensified, and he regarded me with those unwavering eyes, the kind that transform silence into intimacy. "It's growing late," I murmured softly. "You should return home before the weather worsens." But he paused, his tone subdued, almost regretful. The subways flooded on my line. And before rational thought could intervene, I heard myself offer, "You can wait it out here." Just those few words, and the atmosphere transformed irreversibly. The rain was cascading so violently it felt like nature itself was demanding we pause. He suggested taking the armchair, but it was cramped, worn, uncomfortable. I assured him it was fine. The sofa converts to a bed large enough for two. We spent the evening streaming a foreign film. He chuckled quietly, and momentarily the room didn't feel inappropriate. It felt secure, comforting, dangerously authentic. At some point exhaustion claimed me. When consciousness returned, the lights were extinguished and he was resting peacefully nearby. He didn't reach for me. He didn't utter a sound, but I could sense him there, breathing in rhythm with me. The silence pulsed with life. It felt as though his soul was calling to mine. Though neither of us crossed boundaries the way he observed me, I understood something already had. I could have insisted he return to the armchair, but I didn't. And perhaps that's when our narrative truly commenced. The morning following that night, I entered the workshop pretending nothing had shifted. But internally everything had. Ethan sat quietly in the corner, attention fixed on his journal as if every inscription there could conceal what we both recalled. I wanted to catch his eye, but whenever I glanced up, he looked elsewhere. We didn't communicate, not even after the session concluded, but I could sense it, that unspoken current still flowing beneath the silence. It was as if the air between us retained the memory of that rainfall. Days elapsed and then he stopped appearing. No calls, no texts, just vacant spaces and a deepening hollowness inside me. I convinced myself it was concern, merely professional worry. But that wasn't truthful, and I recognized it. One evening, I finally summoned the courage to text him. "Just checking in," I typed. "Hope everything's all right." My pulse quickened as I watched the typing indicator blink and vanish. Then his response arrived. "Didn't think you'd reach out." I smiled faintly. That soft, dangerous kind of smile that emerges when your heart remembers what your mind attempts to forget. Several days later, I invited him for weekend mentoring to cover what he'd missed. Part of me insisted it was merely professional obligation. The other part knew differently. He arrived punctually, courteous, respectful, dressed sharply in a navy sweater that somehow made him appear more mature than 24. The initial moments focused on literature and analysis, syntax, symbolism, and Yeats. But gradually, the books receded into irrelevance, and it was simply us, two voices in a hushed space sharing truths unrelated to literature. He confided about his father's illness, how uncertainty became the heaviest presence in their household. And as he spoke, I recognized the same emptiness I'd been carrying for years. There was something about his eyes. It wasn't passion. It was trust, and somehow that made resisting even more challenging. He looked at me as if I represented safety, someone who finally comprehended. And when his hand grazed mine, just barely, we both froze. It wasn't deliberate, yet neither of us withdrew. Our hands simply remained there in that trembling stillness that communicates what language cannot. I felt my heartbeat in my fingertips. Every breath grew heavier, not from apprehension but from knowing. Knowing that something invisible between us was becoming undeniable. He eventually retracted his hand, but the warmth lingered like an afterimage on skin. For a moment neither of us spoke. We simply stared at the half-completed poem on the table, one exploring love that doesn't seek permission. He read the lines softly, and I swear I absorbed every word. When he departed that evening, my apartment felt excessively quiet, like he'd taken something I couldn't reclaim. I told myself I'd see him again soon. But deeply I already understood. We were moving toward something irreversible. That Saturday evening I nearly didn't attend. Ethan had invited me to his colleague's gallery opening. And for hours I told myself it was impossible. But something within whispered, "You need to see him again." When I finally walked into that softly illuminated space, I saw him before he noticed me. He was conversing, relaxed, assured, and momentarily I didn't see my apprentice. I saw a man who carried the kind of composure that once felt like sanctuary. He noticed me. Our eyes connected just long enough to make the ambient music fade into silence. He smiled, that same understated smile that always made me forget my own boundaries. And before I realized it, he was approaching through the crowd. "You came," he said it softly, but something resided behind his words, a mixture of gratitude and amazement. I wanted to tell him I didn't understand why I was there, but truthfully I did. Something about him made me feel acknowledged in ways I hadn't experienced in years. We talked quietly, carefully, not revealing much. The lights softened, the conversations around us dimmed, and briefly, it felt like the world permitted us to be whoever we chose to be. Later, as the evening concluded, the rain began again. Soft, familiar, the same rain that once brought him to my threshold. He offered to share his rideshare, though he didn't have to. But internally, I believe we both craved the quiet journey. The one where we didn't need to conceal what words couldn't express. When we reached my building, thunder murmured softly in the distance. The streets were flooding, so I suggested he wait until it subsided. We sat on the sofa, the same one from that first night. But this time, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was weighted, tender, like a truth-awaiting voice. He looked at me, steady, careful, and then he said, "Can I tell you something without you being upset?" I nodded, though my heart was already trembling. He exhaled slowly. "I think about you more than I should." For a moment, neither of us moved. The air felt charged like lightning before it strikes. And when I finally spoke, my voice barely reached him. "Then you're not alone in that." He looked away, attempting to steady himself. "I know this is wrong," he whispered. "But it doesn't feel wrong when I'm with you." His honesty fractured something inside me and mended something else simultaneously. I wanted to tell him to stop, to forget everything, but instead I said, "Some feelings aren't meant to be right. They're just meant to be real." We sat in silence, close but not touching. And yet, it felt as if our hearts already had. That night nothing happened. But everything changed. Because sometimes confession is the most intimate thing two people can share. When he finally left, the rain had ceased. But inside me, something had just awakened. The weeks that followed felt like reality unraveling itself in slow motion. Initially I thought we could conceal it. The way our eyes sought each other too frequently. But hearts have ways of revealing what lips refuse to confess. It started with murmurs in the studio, quiet speculation when I walked past, a few colleagues observing me with a kind of sympathy that burned more than anger ever could. I pretended not to notice, but truth has footsteps, and they were growing louder. One afternoon the program director called me in. She spoke gently, too gently, like someone navigating between empathy and responsibility. She said there had been concerns, speculation, discussion about me and Ethan. My stomach turned cold. I tried maintaining composure, but my voice wavered. I said it was nothing, merely a mentor assisting an apprentice. But guilt inhabits the tone you cannot control. And she heard it. That evening, Ethan's supervisor came to the center. They were concerned, protective, confused. They demanded explanations I couldn't provide without betraying myself. I saw Ethan from the corridor, standing behind them. His eyes full of fear and affection, both screaming simultaneously. The next morning I was asked to step back temporarily, suspended just until matters settled. But we both understood nothing was going to settle after this. Everything had already shifted. That night, I sat on the sofa staring at the muted glow of the television, though I couldn't process a single word. The silence was too heavy, too loud. And then a knock. When I opened the door, he was standing there, drenched from the rain. His eyes said "I'm sorry" before his lips could form the words. He stepped inside slowly, uncertain if I'd turn him away, but I didn't. Couldn't. We didn't talk much. He sat beside me, and then quietly he reached for my hand. His touch was warm, trembling, real. I turned to him, and momentarily it felt like all the chaos outside had gone silent. I placed my hand on his cheek. His eyes closed as if the simple gesture could stop the storm. Tears blurred my vision and I whispered softly, "We can't fix this, Ethan." He nodded, his voice breaking. "I know." We sat there like two broken chapters from the same narrative, holding on to a moment that shouldn't have existed, yet felt too human to deny. He wrapped his arms around me, not with desire, but with a kind of sorrow that binds two souls in silence. And for the first time I realized sometimes love doesn't need a future to be real. Sometimes it just needs a heartbeat willing to stay for one more second. When he left that night, I didn't follow him to the door. I just sat there tracing the warmth he left behind, trying to remember what it felt like to be seen without being judged. It's strange how time moves differently when something inside you has been changed forever. Days pass like whispers, and yet some memories never lose their sound. They echo softly but endlessly. Months had gone by since that night. The air had shifted. I was relocated to another program across town. A new district, a new studio, new faces, but the same quiet ache beneath my ribs. People called it a fresh start. But starting over doesn't always mean moving on. Sometimes it just means learning how to carry the silence better. Every time I saw an apprentice raise their hand or smile shyly, I'd catch myself searching for his eyes. That warmth, that unspoken understanding that once made the world feel less heavy. Ethan had completed the program that summer. He secured a position at a design firm. I discovered this through a mutual contact at the old center. I remember whispering his name under my breath and smiling through tears I didn't anticipate. It felt like pride and heartbreak all tangled into one. Sometimes late at night, I'd catch myself wondering if he ever thought of me. Not as a mentor, not as something forbidden, but as someone who saw him before the world demanded he become strong, someone who believed in the gentleness he concealed from everyone else. I missed him. Not as an apprentice, but as a soul missing its reflection. Then one morning months later, fate did something cruelly kind. I was sitting at a cafe near the studio grading portfolios. And when I looked up, he was there. Across the room, taller, more refined, the young man was gone, but his eyes still carried the quiet warmth that once made me forget the rules. He saw me too. And for a moment the world slowed down again. No one around us knew what that silence meant, but we did. He smiled. Not the shy smile of a young apprentice anymore, but the calm, knowing smile of a man who's made peace with the past. I smiled back, though my heart trembled quietly behind it. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Sometimes closure doesn't come from words, but from acceptance. I watched him walk away. And in that moment, I realized he wasn't mine to keep, but he would always be part of the woman I became. He was just my apprentice. But in another life, maybe he was meant to be more. And that's the part of the story my heart will always keep. Sometimes the ones we can't keep are the ones who stay with us the longest.